Welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Laura Boycourt. Today, we'll be talking about mental health and coping skills for children. And joining us is Jenna Bernstein, Assistant Director of Social Work at Sheppard Pratt, the nation's largest private nonprofit provider of mental health services. Jenna, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'd love to start by just if you could introduce yourself to listeners and viewers about your background, and then if you could tell us what you do at Sheppard Pratt.
Sure, of course. So I am a licensed clinical social worker. I've worked with children and adolescents for the past 15 years across a variety of settings. So I've done outpatient therapy, residential, in-home, in the schools, and now I do crisis stabilization. At a Sheppard Pratt, we have our inpatient crisis stabilization units. So I supervise all of the social workers that work with the patients on those units and help form the therapy curriculum and help connect them to resources.
Okay, wow. So it sounds like you've been in lots of different settings, and you've been able to sort of have your finger on the pulse of what adolescents, children have been experiencing in all of those settings. Um, I'd like to get into a Pew Research study from January. And if I was reading it correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it said more than being bullied or facing difficulty with drugs or alcohol, parents who responded were the most worried about their child experiencing depression or anxiety. Is this something that you've seen in the parents and children that you've interacted with of late?
Yes, I definitely
Mhm.
think that the study is accurate, and I think a lot of it is that since the onset of COVID-19,
Mhm.
we've seen a increase of awareness of the mental health crisis in this country, and specifically with children and adolescents. And an additional CDC study found that there was a 31% of increase in anxiety and depression symptoms among
Wow.
teens, and as since COVID-19. I
Mhm.
think the increased isolation that we all experienced, as well as the disruption of their schedules. And then at the same time, the increase in social media
Mhm.
access has really
Mhm.
affected kids and teens.
So would it be safe to say that because of that isolation of COVID-19, that was sort of the the reason for a lot of these increased feelings of depression and anxiety, but also it boosted everyone's awareness of it. It gave us sort of time to sort of pause and realize, or which came first, I guess, would be the question.
I honestly think it's
Yeah,
pretty much
yeah.
both at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So sort of a perfect storm. And also the CDC's most recent youth risk behavior survey seemed to reflect worsening of mental health trends, especially among high school girls over the past decade. Is this what you're seeing? Have you noticed this change? And then a follow-up question to that, what is it specifically about girls that could explain this?
Right. So I think the CDC study found that 1 in 3 high school girls have seriously considered attempting suicide, and that 57% of teenage girls reported feeling persistent sadness and hopelessness, which is a record high.
Jeez.
I honestly think that you know, it's hard to really narrow it down to one gender or one reason
Hmm.
within a gender, but I do know that we have seen just this increase in anxiety and depression especially since the pandemic. I know
Hmm.
that one cause is that I think a lot of activities moved to the virtual platform. So when you think about Zoom, Google Meet, FaceTime, you're staring at that little picture of yourself on the screen,
Hmm. Hmm.
and traditionally more female than male identifying individuals, they have this need to conform, or this need
Hmm.
to really fit into that social construct of beauty.
Hmm.
And so I think that might be a contributing factor, as well as seeing everything on social media with these filters and kind of seeing everyone's
Right.
highlight reel and just constantly comparing ourselves to that.
Yeah, the age of social media. So that might address some of the reasons for female adolescents. What about mental health concerns, maybe that you're seeing specifically in boys or children who identify as non-binary? Anything specific?
Yeah,
in those
well, so
areas?
for non-binary and trans children, I think that seeing everything in the news about legislation designed to limit their access to
Hmm.
gender affirming care and freedom of personal expression is extremely stressful. And I think that we don't realize how much they see of that. I think, it's really important to note the statistics that among LGBTQ plus students, close to 70% say that they experience persistent feelings of sadness and
Hmm.
hopelessness,
Oh,
and that more than 50% reported having poor mental health and 25% have attempted suicide.
oh goodness.
So those are pretty recent statistics, and luckily they are finding a lot of support in the schools and from their peers, but it's definitely something that I see a lot in my work here, that the
Hmm.
population really struggles. Um, and I think just providing them as much support as we can
Hmm.
is
Hmm. And
important.
on that note, we've laid out sort of what you're seeing, coping skills, really important tools for adolescents to have, but then also tools that maybe parents and caregivers can have to help with this. So what tools or strategies can parents, caregivers, grandparents, anyone who is sort of in that caregiving role, what can they offer to help the children manage, in healthy ways, that anxiety, that worry, that the self-esteem issues, and other parts of their mental health? What can be done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that parents and caregivers of all kinds really can start with modeling those
Mhm.
behaviors in themselves. So just you know, letting them know it's okay to not be okay. When you're stuck in a traffic jam on the way to work, saying things like, "Oh man, now I'm going to be late to work. I feel so angry." And just really showing them and modeling for them that it's okay to feel that
Mhm.
way, and maybe
Mhm.
like take some deep breaths in the car or say, I'm going to listen to some music to help me feel better.
Mhm.
I also think that in this age, since COVID and with social media, we're more isolated and less connected than ever before. So it's really important for parents to foster that connection. Um, One thing that I think is a bit counterintuitive, but um, finding situations where you can connect with your kid without making them make direct eye contact really
Oh, okay.
helps them. It helps them feel more like allow themselves to
Mhm.
be more vulnerable and open up a bit more. Um, so I mean, when you think about it, fathers and sons traditionally always go fishing. But they're
Mhm.
looking at the water, they're not looking at each other. Some ways to allow for those conversations now would be driving in a car, playing video games with your kid, um, or even if you just notice them looking down at dinner, just not correcting that behavior as being disrespectful, but knowing that they might
Mhm.
be trying to be a bit more vulnerable with you, and it's hard for them to do that while making that eye contact.
I hadn't thought about that, but it makes a lot of sense. So is that something, a situation in which, you're doing an activity or just, sitting side by side, whether it's video games or whatever, driving in the car, do you suggest just allowing sort of that space, that, silence, or and hoping that, the teen or the child will bring something up, or do you encourage parents and caregivers to bring things up? Um, or
Uh,
does it
I
sort of depend on the situation?
I think it depends a lot on your
Yeah.
kid. I think, um, it really depends on the
Hmm.
situation. If you know something might have happened at school, maybe just asking really open-ended questions. Like, if a teacher
Hmm.
has brought something to you, just be like, hey, how did it go in Miss Jacobs' class today?
Hmm.
Not saying like, I heard you got in trouble, what happened? But just a little bit
Sure.
more
Yeah.
more of an open-ended question just to give them
Mhm.
that space. But yeah, not to be afraid of the silence. And then another thing is when the children come and they finally do share a situation, I think as caregivers and as nurturers, we immediately want to offer a solution. Um,
Mhm.
but I really encourage you to just allow that space and validate their feelings, um, because sometimes they don't really want that quick fix or they want to figure
Mhm.
it out on their own. They just are feeling frustrated and are finally willing to share that with you.
Okay.
So I would say, as much as you can, try to resist that urge to fix it immediately.
Which is hard.
It is. It's
It can
really
be hard.
hard. But if you
Yeah.
think it is something that will require you to help or an adult, just say, kind of an open-ended question like, wow, that sounds so frustrating. Is there any
Mhm.
way I could help with that? Or
Mhm.
what do you think should happen next?
Okay. So it sounds like modeling good behavior, allowing the space either for silence or for something to be brought up, and then just sort of avoiding that sort of urge to do a quick fix. Um, we've got a variety of ages of children. We've got our preschoolers, we've got our 18-year-olds. It's a huge range, and I'm guessing that it's while we can apply a lot of those strategies and tools to different ages and tweak them as necessary. What can parents? Is there anything parents or caregivers should sort of keep in mind for those different ages, elementary, middle, high schoolers? Any big differences?
Yeah, I think that we can start modeling it really early in young
Mhm,
childhood, but maybe just kind of change your vocabulary around it. So in my traffic jam example, like, oh man, I feel so angry. But then
mhm,
maybe like once your kid's a bit older, kind of moving into more specific
mhm,
emotions you might feeling, or being like, oh man, I feel like focusing on, man, I should really focus on what I can control. I'm already gonna be
mhm.
late for work, but maybe I could just focus on feeling better right now. So
Sure.
I think things like that. I think offering them, I think the coping skills you recommend to your kid, that changes a bit as they get older. So, for elementary school age, things like coloring, sensory activities,
Mhm,
like stress balls or smelling a nice candle. And then as they get into middle school, they might want to explore journaling or more mindfulness activities. And then in high school, if they do have access to a phone, there's even these great mindfulness apps,
mhm,
and a lot of things to there's like new hobbies they could try, different ways of exercising, and even if something you want to do as a family, they've got those axe throwing places or those
I've seen
demolition
those, yep,
rooms.
I'm
Yeah, those
intrigued.
could yeah, so those could be great things to do to
Sure.
help them kind of channel that energy if necessary. So
No, absolutely, those are great recommendations. So it sounds like there are plenty of things that parents and caregivers can try, modeling, the tools, and I know, at school they've got counselors that they can go to. When is it time for parents to sort of seek out that professional help if things don't seem to be working or improving? And again, you've allowed time. You don't want to rely on that quick fix. But if things just aren't going the way that you would hope for your child, when is it time to reach out for that professional help? Would you say?
yeah, that's a great question, and it's so important to look out for those warning signs. Some warning signs that I encourage parents to look out for would be excessive worry, self blame, increased feelings of guilt, a loss of interest in favorite activities, changes in appetite or sleep schedules. And then, of course, the ones where you're immediately going to want to act is if there's any suicidal ideation expressed, any self harming behaviors, or any aggressive behaviors. That is when you need to immediately reach out for help. And
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and for that on that note, would you suggest for the things that aren't quite as immediate, would you suggest that parents reach out to that school counselor first, reach out to sort of any connection in the community for counseling, or what's I guess the sort of the progression? Is there any sort of
Right.
ideal progression for that?
Well, I think that it'll really depend on the family and
Yeah.
what they're looking for. The school is absolutely a great resource, but also at Sheppard Pratt, we have a number of resources that are available as well to families. For example, if you are seeing a problem that is just isn't quite a crisis, but isn't getting better on its own,
Mhm.
and so you're seeking non-immediate psychiatric services, we have a care navigation team that's available to help you finding appropriate care
Mhm.
provider for your child. They figure out like what insurance you have, what area you're in, if you
Oh, that's
want
great.
virtual or in
Mhm.
person, and it's a phone number you just call. That's 410-938-5000, and
Okay.
they're open Mondays through Fridays. Now, if if things have kind of escalated and you feel like therapy once a week or checking in with someone infrequently won't be enough for your
Hmm.
child, we also have psychiatric urgent care, which is a
Okay.
great alternative to going to the ER. It's a lot less traumatic. We have them at both our Towson and Elkridge location, and it's open every day. And what happens there is you meet with a professional who's trained in kind of assessing where your child's needs are. And this
Mhm.
is for adults as well, but
Sure.
children and adults. But they'll meet with the provider, and the provider will assess, do they need something a bit more than therapy? Do they
Hmm.
need like a partial hospitalization program? Or do they need to be admitted to our inpatient units? And they will make those connections right then and there when you come in. So it's a great resource that we have. And then, of course, if your loved one is in crisis and they're experiencing, if you feel that they're a danger to themselves or others, there's the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, which you can call or text at 988. And then there's also 911 or mobile crisis in
Hmm.
your
Hmm.
area.
Oh, fantastic. And it sounds like the Sheppard Pratt resources, I would imagine those, you can call the phone number or find those on your website. And those
Yes.
sound great, especially because they recognize that it's not one size fits all, and they will sort of take the child's specific concerns, family's concerns into consideration to find the best fit, which is wonderful. Um, any parting words of encouragement or best advice to offer parents? These are such, heavy times, and such a heavy topic that's so worthwhile and needs to be talked about, and, can be, it's deep. Any words of encouragement to offer?
Absolutely. I think, give yourselves grace. This is an incredibly challenging time to be a parent.
Mhm.
And, listening to a podcast like this is a great start, and it shows that you're really thinking about what your loved ones need. I think also another good piece of advice is to take care of yourself,
Mhm.
reaching out, making sure that you're using coping skills and that you have someone to talk to if needed. And then, of course, not being afraid to reach out for help. It doesn't, like I said, this is a really challenging time. Those statistics are pretty scary, and a lot of people are really struggling right now. And so there's a lot of resources within the community to help. Don't be afraid to look into them.
No, that's great advice. Well, thank you so much to Jenna Bernstein from Sheppard Pratt for taking the time to speak with us about mental health and coping skills for kids. And thank you to all of our viewers and listeners as well. Make sure you visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in video and podcast format. I'm Laura Boycourt with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thank you so much.